Hey everyone, it's Miss Lopez. In this video, I'm going to walk you through the FRQ practice on yarrow plants. You're given some background information in this part right here, as well as some data about the experiment that was happening. So here's what you were given. Researchers observed that the average size of yarrow plants, also called or genus Aquila, growing on the slopes of Sierra Nevada mountains gradually decrease with increasing elevation. To eliminate the effects of environmental differences at different elevations, researchers collected seeds from various altitudes and planted them in a common garden. They then measured the heights of the resulting plants. So even though their experiment was done all at the same level, they indicate which of the plants were captured, or the seeds were captured at the different altitudes or heights on the mountains. And so you can see how the ones that were at lower altitude at about 1,000 grew very tall plants, whereas the ones that were higher up, say 3,000 and above, grew very short plants. So in part A, it's telling you to identify the question that the scientists were asking. And notice that the word identify is in bold. That is the verb that College Board is asking you to do. Now, when you're doing these types of questions, you want to make sure that you can clearly see the dependent and independent variable. So on your lab template sheet, we have provided a scaffold or template question just to make things simpler for you and the reader. This type of question would be worth 1 point. And the question would sound something like this. How does plant height change in response to elevation of seed collection? When you format a question like this, it sets it up so that your dependent variable, or plant height, is affected by the dependent variable, which is the different elevations at which the seeds were collected. It also sets it up so that you can easily make a prediction or hypothesis. Does plant height increase, decrease, or is unaffected by the elevation at which it was collected? For part B, you're asked to identify 2 factors in the experiment that were held constant. So since you're asked to identify 2 factors, this will be worth 2 points. Now in the experiment, they did keep the plants in a garden, a controlled garden. So here you can use any aspect of the garden that could have been held constant. You don't have to list them all, you just had to identify 2. So here are some examples. So I have listed here any of the factors that could have been held constant in this experiment. You don't need all of them, you just need to identify 2. But it is important that you keep this as a complete sentence. So if I were writing this as a complete sentence, it might be 2 factors held constant in the experiment include the amount of light the plants get and the temperature of the soil. Or you could also say that 2 variables held constant in this experiment was the amount of water the plants received and the growth time of the seeds. For part C, it asks you to construct an appropriately labeled bar graph between two of the flowers and show what it would look like if the flowers had a statistically significant difference between them. Now this you can just roughly sketch. So you'd label your y-axis and your x-axis. I'm going to label the plants just plant 1 and plant 2. And now I'm going to just sketch in some bar graphs. And the key thing I want to have here is I want to show a statistically significant difference between them, which means I'll need to add sembars, and the sembars cannot overlap. So I've just drawn a basic outline for my bar graphs, and now I'm going to add sembars, and I'm going to make sure that the sembars do not overlap. Since no actual data was provided for this question, I could draw them as big as I wanted to. I just had to make sure that to show a statistically significant difference that they did not overlap. Part D asks you to make and justify a prediction on what would happen to the plant height if left to grow for several generations in the garden. Now, since all I'm doing is making a prediction, I don't really have to worry as much about being right or wrong as long as my justification is sound. I am doing this in two different segments. This first segment here is my prediction that eventually they'll all be the same height. And then here, the because is where my justification is. And for me, this justification was if everything else was held constant and there is a statistical difference simply based on where the seeds were collected or what elevation they were, then once elevation is removed, then the plants will eventually all be the same height. Again, with predictions, they can be pretty much whatever you think or whatever you suspect is going to happen, as long as your justification matches the prediction and the information that's given to you in the prompt. I hope this video was helpful. Thanks for watching.